There is a quiet kind of tiredness that doesn't come from hard work. You can finish an ordinary day, complete what needed to be done, and still feel mentally worn down by the evening. Your body may not be exhausted, yet your mind feels slightly stretched, as if it has been adjusting all day. This often happens when your attention rarely stays in one place for long. A message appears while you are thinking. A notification interrupts a small moment of rest. Someone reaches out, and your focus shifts almost automatically. Each moment feels minor, and responding feels reasonable. The strain is not in the size of the interruption, but in the repeated movement inside your mind. Every time you turn toward someone else's need, your focus quietly reorganizes. Your nervous system becomes slightly alert, preparing to respond with care. Even brief exchanges require energy. When this pattern continues throughout the day, your thoughts never fully settle into depth. By evening, you may notice a subtle restlessness, a quiet readiness that does not completely switch off. When silence finally arrives, part of you still feels on call, as if something might need you at any moment. Being available can feel meaningful because it creates connection and a sense of usefulness. Yet, constant accessibility gradually reduces the space where your own thoughts can deepen without interruption. If this feels familiar, it does not mean something is wrong with you. It simply means your attention has been stretched in many directions for a long time. If you look closely, being available is rarely just a habit. It often becomes part of how you see yourself. You may quietly believe that being responsive means being dependable. Answering quickly can feel like proof that you care. Staying reachable can feel like evidence that you matter. Over time, this begins to shape identity. You are the reliable one, the person who replies, the one who can be counted on. There is nothing wrong with that role. Responsibility and care are beautiful qualities. The difficulty appears when your sense of worth becomes tied to constant access. When stepping away feels uncomfortable, not because someone truly needs you, but because you are afraid of what it might say about you. You may notice a quiet guilt when you let a message wait, a subtle anxiety when you silence your phone. It can feel as if you are neglecting something important, even when you are simply resting. This reaction is not weakness. It is the mind protecting an identity that once kept you safe and valued. If you learned that being attentive earned approval, your nervous system may still treat responsiveness as necessary. So even when no real urgency exists, your body reacts as if it does. The deeper question is not whether you care about others. It is whether you allow yourself to exist without proving your availability. When identity softens, availability can become a choice instead of a reflex. When availability becomes constant, your nervous system rarely returns to complete rest. The alertness may be soft, almost unnoticeable. Yet it lingers beneath the surface of your day. Each notification carries a small signal that something requires your attention. Your body often responds before your thoughts fully catch up. There is a slight narrowing of focus, a gentle readiness to engage. This reaction is natural. The brain is designed to detect signals and prepare quickly. In earlier times, that preparation helped humans stay safe. Today, the signals are social rather than physical, yet your internal system reacts in a similar way. An unanswered message can feel like a possible rupture in connection. A delay might carry a subtle fear of being misunderstood. Even when no conflict exists, your system may interpret uncertainty as something to monitor. When these small activations repeat throughout the day, your body does not fully power down between them. Instead, it remains lightly engaged. This state does not feel like panic. It feels like quiet vigilance. You may notice that true stillness becomes harder to access. Your breathing stays slightly elevated. Your thoughts move quickly, as if anticipating the next shift. Over time, mild activation sustained for hours gently depletes mental energy. Deep rest depends on a sense of safety. Safety allows attention to widen and thoughts to slow. When your system expects interruption, depth feels less available. You remain prepared rather than fully settled. Stillness begins to feel unfamiliar, not because it is unsafe, but because alertness has become the habit your body knows best. When this quiet vigilance continues, it slowly shapes your emotional state. The change is subtle at first. You may notice that small frustrations feel heavier than they once did. Patience becomes slightly thinner. Your reactions carry more weight, even when the situation is minor. This is not because you are becoming less kind. It is because your emotional energy has been quietly spent throughout the day. Each shift of attention requires care and adjustment. Even gentle conversations use inner resources. When those resources are constantly directed outward, they have little time to renew. Over time, this can create a sense of emotional dullness. Moments that once felt engaging may feel muted. You may struggle to access enthusiasm that used to come naturally. This does not mean your depth has disappeared. It means your system has been working without pause. When your focus repeatedly moves toward others, your own feelings receive less space. Without that space, emotions remain slightly unsettled. They do not fully rise or fully resolve. They hover in the background, adding to a quiet sense of fatigue. You might describe this as feeling off without knowing why. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet something feels gently out of balance. Often, the imbalance is not caused by conflict, but by constant adjustment. Emotional stability depends on moments of inward attention. Without those moments, your internal landscape has little chance to reset. and when it cannot reset, even calm days can feel heavier than they should. There is a quiet difference between connection and constant access. Connection is chosen. It carries warmth and intention. Constant access feels automatic. It happens before you fully decide. When you are always reachable, the boundary between your time and someone else's need begins to blur. You may not notice the line fading at first. You answer quickly. You adjust your schedule slightly. You tell yourself it is only a small shift. Over time, those small shifts reshape your sense of space. Moments that once felt personal begin to feel shared. Your attention becomes something others can enter without warning. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are gentle edges that protect your inner stability. Without those edges, your energy flows outward more often than inward. You may find it difficult to identify what you actually want in a quiet moment. Your thoughts can feel influenced by what others expect. This does not mean you lack independence. It means your attention has been repeatedly redirected. When boundaries soften too much, resentment can quietly grow. Not because others are wrong, but because your system is tired. You might feel frustration that seems misplaced. You may long for space without knowing how to create it. Healthy boundaries allow connection without depletion. They make room for both presence and rest. When you recognize that your availability is a choice, not an obligation, your attention begins to feel steadier. And steadiness creates space for your own inner life to return to clarity. When your limits are crossed quietly and repeatedly, the reaction rarely looks dramatic. It often begins as a faint heaviness that is hard to explain. You may notice that small requests feel slightly larger than before. The shift is subtle, which makes it confusing. You still care about the people in your life, yet something inside feels strained. This strain is not a loss of kindness. It is energy that has been extended without enough renewal. When attention keeps moving outward, your own needs slowly fade into the background. At first, this feels manageable. You assume one more adjustment will not matter. Over time, however, the accumulation registers in your body. Your system senses that there has been little pause between demands. The mind may respond with quiet resistance that appears as impatience or distance. You might feel an urge to withdraw, not from dislike, but from fatigue. This can surprise you because it does not align with your values. Yet, it is often a signal that balance has shifted. When boundaries remain unclear, your nervous system looks for protection in subtle ways. That protection can show up as tension in your tone or reduced warmth. It is not intentional. It is the body conserving what energy remains. Understanding this pattern allows resentment to be seen as feedback rather than failure. When limits are gently restored, steadiness returns without force. Connection begins to feel lighter instead of heavy. When availability becomes constant, something else slowly changes. Silence begins to feel unfamiliar. You may finally have a quiet moment, yet instead of relief, there is a slight unease. Your hands reach for your phone without thinking. Your mind searches for something to respond to. This reaction is not weakness, it is conditioning. If your attention has been trained to expect signals, stillness can feel like something is missing. The absence of requests may create a subtle tension rather than calm. Part of you waits for the next interruption. Part of you wonders if you have overlooked something important. Over time, alertness becomes the baseline. Rest feels like an interruption instead of a return. When your system is used to constant engagement, quiet space can feel empty rather than nourishing. You may mistake that emptiness for boredom. In reality, it is unused mental room that has not been experienced without interruption for a long time. At first, that space can feel uncomfortable. Without a demand to respond to, your thoughts drift inward. You begin to notice feelings that were previously postponed. You become aware of subtle fatigue. You might sense emotions that were set aside earlier in the day. Stillness does not create these feelings. It simply reveals what was already there. If you are rarely alone with your own attention, the experience can feel unfamiliar. Yet, familiarity is not the same as safety. Alertness may feel normal, but it is not the same as ease. As your mind slowly remembers how to sit without preparing for interruption, quiet becomes less threatening. It becomes a place where your inner voice can return at its own pace. As quiet becomes unfamiliar, your relationship with yourself can begin to shift. When your attention is usually directed outward, you spend less time noticing your own inner signals. You may respond quickly to others while hesitating to respond to yourself. Small cues such as hunger, fatigue, or emotional tension are easier to overlook when something else always feels more urgent. Over time, this creates a subtle distance between you and your own experience. You might struggle to answer simple questions about what you need, not because you lack awareness, but because awareness has been redirected so often. When the mind is trained to scan for external requests, it becomes less practiced at listening inward. Your inner voice does not disappear. It becomes quieter under the weight of constant adjustment. You may notice that decisions feel heavier. Choices that once felt intuitive may require more thought. This is not confusion in the dramatic sense. It is the effect of reduced contact with your own preferences. Without uninterrupted time, your thoughts do not fully develop. They are paused and resumed repeatedly, which makes clarity harder to access. As a result, you may feel uncertain about what you truly want. The uncertainty is not a flaw. It is a signal that your attention has been shared more than it has been centered. When you slowly begin to reclaim moments that belong only to you, that inner voice strengthens. It does not need force. It only needs space. With space, clarity returns in a quiet and steady way. And as clarity returns, availability becomes something you choose rather than something that defines you. As your inner voice begins to return, you may notice something unexpected. There can be a quiet grief attached to realizing how long you have ignored yourself. Not a dramatic grief, but a soft recognition that your needs were often postponed. You might remember moments when you said yes while meaning maybe. You might recall times when rest was delayed because someone else felt urgent. This awareness is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to create understanding. When availability becomes part of identity, it can feel uncomfortable to see the cost. You may wonder why you allowed it to continue for so long. The answer is often simple. Being needed can feel meaningful. Responding quickly can feel responsible. Staying reachable can feel like proof that you matter. There is nothing wrong with wanting connection. The difficulty begins when worth becomes tied to responsiveness. If your value feels connected to how quickly you answer or how consistently you show up, rest can start to feel risky. You may worry that stepping back will change how others see you. You may fear that quiet will make you less relevant. These fears are understandable. Humans are wired for belonging. Yet belonging does not require constant access. It requires presence that is sustainable. When you begin to separate your worth from your availability, something softens. You realize that you do not need to prove your care through exhaustion. Care can exist alongside limits. Connection can exist alongside pause. And your identity can remain steady even when your phone is silent. When you loosen the link between worth and responsiveness, a new kind of steadiness begins to form. It is not dramatic. It feels quiet and grounded. You start to notice that a delayed reply does not erase your value. A missed call does not cancel your care. Your presence is not measured by speed. This realization can feel unfamiliar at first. If you have been praised for always showing up, slowing down may feel like stepping out of character. You might sense a slight discomfort when you choose not to answer immediately. That discomfort does not mean you are doing something wrong. It often means you are interrupting an old pattern. Patterns create safety through repetition. When you change them, your system briefly searches for the familiar. Yet familiarity is not always what protects you. Sometimes it is what exhausts you. As you allow pauses to exist without explanation, your body begins to settle. The constant readiness softens. Your attention widens instead of narrowing around the next signal. You may find that conversations become more intentional. When you are not responding from reflex, you respond from choice. Choice carries a different tone. It feels steady rather than pressured. Over time, others adjust as well. People learn the rhythm you establish. The world does not collapse when you step back. Often, it simply rearranges itself around your boundaries. In that rearrangement, you discover that availability can remain generous without becoming constant, and generosity feels lighter when it is not driven by fear. As your boundaries become steadier, the rhythm of your inner world begins to change. The urgency that once accompanied every signal no longer rises as quickly. There is a small gap before you move toward response. Within that gap, awareness turns inward instead of outward. You notice your energy level. You sense whether you feel open or already stretched. This moment of noticing reshapes the entire interaction. Response no longer comes from reflex. It comes from alignment. When alignment guides you, the tone of your communication shifts. There is less pressure behind your words. There is less strain beneath your agreement. You are still caring, yet you are not overriding yourself to prove it. At first, this shift can feel unfamiliar. Your body may expect the old pattern of immediate engagement. Without that pattern, there can be a brief flicker of uncertainty. Over time, repeated experiences of safe pause build a different kind of trust. Your nervous system begins to learn that connection does not depend on constant speed. You discover that relationships remain intact, even when your responses are measured. This discovery changes how your attention behaves. Instead of scattering toward every request, it settles into what truly requires you. Settled attention feels heavier in a grounding way rather than in a draining way. Your thoughts carry continuity instead of fragmentation. Your presence feels deliberate instead of exposed. Availability becomes an expression of choice rather than a habit of self-erasure. And when choice replaces reflex, steadiness grows quietly within you. As steadiness grows, your relationship with time begins to shift. You no longer experience every moment as something that must be filled with response. There is room for thought to unfold without interruption. Ideas are allowed to complete themselves. Feelings are allowed to surface without being quickly set aside. This slower rhythm does not reduce your connection to others. It deepens your connection to yourself. When your attention is not constantly redirected, it begins to gather strength. You may notice that concentration improves. Tasks feel less fragmented. Conversations feel more intentional. Instead of dividing your awareness across multiple channels, you inhabit one experience at a time. This kind of presence has weight. It feels grounded rather than scattered. The mind no longer scans for the next signal with the same urgency. It rests more easily between interactions. With that rest, creativity begins to return. Clarity feels less forced. Your internal dialogue becomes quieter, not because thoughts disappear, but because they are not competing with constant interruption. You may begin to sense a gentle confidence in your own timing. You trust that responding thoughtfully is more meaningful than responding instantly. That trust softens the pressure you once carried. Availability remains, but it no longer dictates your pace. Your pace becomes something you choose. In the end, the cost of constant availability is not loud. It does not announce itself with obvious collapse. It shows up as quiet depletion that slowly reshapes how you feel inside your own life. You may move through your days appearing capable and composed, yet carrying a subtle weight that is difficult to explain. That weight often comes from a tension that has rarely been allowed to return home. When your focus continually extends outward, your inner world waits. It waits for space. It waits for steadiness. It waits for the moment when you are not preparing to respond. Reclaiming that space does not require withdrawal from the people you care about. It requires remembering that your energy is finite and worthy of protection. When availability becomes intentional rather than automatic, something softens in your body. Your breathing feels less hurried. Your thoughts move with more continuity. You are still reachable, yet you are no longer stretched thin by every signal. There is a difference between being present and being perpetually open. Presence carries depth. Perpetual openness carries strain. As you learn to close gently when needed, your inner landscape regains balance. Balance does not mean silence from the world. It means your nervous system no longer lives in constant anticipation. You begin to trust that stepping back does not erase your value. You begin to feel that connection can survive pause. And in that quiet trust, your mind discovers a steadiness that does not depend on being constantly available.